Hi, everybody. My name is Maura Keefe. I'm one of the Pillow Scholars in Residence, and it is a thrill for me to be sitting on this new stage for the first time. I have to start off by saying this is a different kind of conversation. This conversation has been happening among them all week, before this, individually with the co-curators, and we have a lot to talk about, but it's not all going to happen tonight. So please forgive me for not being able to talk in depth with each one of these artists who is such an extraordinary contributor to the life and legacy and future of Jacob's Pillow. So first off, let me just thank them all for their amazing work tonight. Could I ask you each to introduce yourselves and say your current hometown?
My name is Mythili Prakash, and I'm from Los Angeles, California.
My name is Jasmine Hearn, and I'm currently in Houston, Texas.
Good evening. So my name is Trae Trott, and I am from Bermuda.
Hello, I'm Sara Mearns, and I am based in New York.
Hi, I'm Tatarsky from New York, based in Philly.
Hi, my name is Nélida Tirado. I'm from New York.
Hi, my name is Dormeshia, and I currently reside in Hackensack, New Jersey.
I want to actually ask you to pass that mic back on down to Mythili, because I want to start with you, because you literally ask a provocative question in your work about can we rewrite the story. And I've been thinking about the way the conversation started with each one of you as individuals about what does American identity mean to you, but I've also been thinking about now American dance identity. And so you asking this question of can we rewrite the story, could you maybe talk about the explicit nature of that question and how it feels like it's potentially shaping this week for you?
Yeah. I've grown up with Indian myth. I was born in Los Angeles, but Indian culture, Indian art, this practice, Bharatanatyam, that I do, has been in my life since before I was born. My mom is my dance teacher. Her name is Mythili Prakash, and her and my dad started a dance school before I was born. So I literally grew up in this environment of dance, music, storytelling, and we learn these stories as a part of our upbringing, the same way that we grew up with Disney and animation and comic books and stuff like that, and they subconsciously form our identity. They form the way we perceive ourselves. And so these stories, like the one I did today, they're ones that we've danced and read about since we were kids. And this particular one is one that I've never been able to make sense of. Like a lot of times there's a philosophical angle to stories that when they don't make sense socially or culturally, there's like a mystical reason behind it, So then you're like, okay, fine, like I'll accept that. But this one, it was funny because when my team of collaborators and I had our first conversation together, the idea was not to explore this story, but it came up in conversation and all of us had a personal connection to it. This idea of sit like a lady, close your legs, don't overstep in a certain way, were things that we were told in various different ways. And this story was sort of a way to tell it as well. And I remember dancing this piece, like the song that's first heard was a piece that I danced in my first solo debut when I was 9 years old. And I remember when I had to portray Kali, who her other half, Shiva, lifts his leg in the competition and she's not allowed to lift her leg, I was taught in the dance that she says, oh, okay, and she surrenders. And I could never make sense of that, And so that is where the impetus to, today, how do I tell that story to my daughter? How do I teach that to my students? How do I make sense of that in all of my different roles? And so I just felt like we have to rewrite. Culture has to evolve. It is an oral tradition that is not kept in text because the people who wrote those came from a certain class and a certain caste and a certain gender, And so as artists, it's our role to constantly engage with our myth in a way that is relevant to society today. And today, this story feels like it just has a whole new relevance. And my collaborators and I had a circle before the show, and it was just a very powerful, moving one, and it affected, I think, our feeling and our performance today.
I actually think, Dormeshia, yours is sort of the opposite story. Sorry that I've got you at the opposite side of the stage also, but I was thinking that you're not rewriting the story so much as deliberately reminding us of stories that maybe we never knew or maybe we forgot. So could you just say something about the impetus for Unsung Sheroes and how you started to do the research with the dancers?
It started with just the name of the show, Americana to me. And I, began just the research on Americana. And the things that I found there, I found that I didn't necessarily relate to. So then I thought, am I gonna have to look up Black Americana? Knowing that it's 1900 to 1950, I know already how we were represented. And so I didn't want to look, but I thought if I'm doing thorough research, I'm gonna go ahead and have to do that. So I did, and it was exactly what I thought. We were being portrayed as, it was blackface, and it was that whole thing. And while we were being portrayed that way, what was the reality was really the very opposite. We were very educated, innovative, groundbreaking, and as Black female artists, we weren't necessarily allowed to, be out front. You had to kind of be in a line. You had to be of a certain skin tone. You couldn't be too brown. And so these ladies that we're honoring and the ladies that you see on the stage are obviously very, pigmented, melanated, as we say, and we're embracing all the different body types that we don't necessarily fit into these cookie cutter sort of situations, that we can be who we are and be amazing in that.
I mean, Sara, I've been thinking about how your sort of different dance worlds from the two that we've just talked about, a very classical tradition, then a vernacular tradition, and the two worlds that we see in the work tonight between you and choreographer Joshua Bergasse. You're even on the same island of New York, but they're very different worlds. Not uncharted territory for you. We saw you here in 2019 doing a series of very different works called Beyond Ballet. And so I was wondering if you could say something about sort of the perspective that you got about the kind of openness that maybe led to conversations in the studio working on Gershwin's Suite.
Well, I should say that the choreographer is my husband. And, Yes, we live in New York, and we are both in the dance world, but as you know, in New York, it's a very big dance world. So he does his thing, I do my thing, and we don't actually collide very often, but I think this was a perfect opportunity when Pam called and said, would you guys collaborate somehow? We took that chance because we don't ever get these chances in New York. So I think I sort of left it to him to figure out what he wanted to sort of do. And I think we were both in the headspace of doing something a little bit more lighthearted, just because of what I was personally going through and just coming off of the pandemic and, what we went through as artists in New York. And, it was just such a serious time for us that okay, I just want to sort of let loose on stage and sort of have people see me in this comedic way that they don't or normally see me as. I'm sort of, when I go on stage, I'm a very serious, dramatic dancer. So I think he wanted to show that off in that way, and also pair me with dancers that I danced with for years. Gonzalo I've danced with for decades, and Gilbert's an amazing new dancer that's coming up that we are just starting our partnership. So it was really fun to and bring them into it as well. But I think to work with Josh in that way, where it's I don't usually have to work with comedic beats of okay, this is how the audience is going to react to me. I don't have to think about that. But he's no, I watched it. And he comes back and he's okay, this wasn't working, so we need to do this because I want the audience to react to this. And it's sort of hard for us because we're not usually funny on stage. So it's it's an interesting sort of trajectory this whole week of figuring out what that is for us. And so then we can take whatever we learned here and bring it back to New York City Ballet, to a bigger stage, on how we sort of perform for a bigger stage in that way.
I mean, I've been thinking also another real through line for me this week is also thinking about how storytelling matters. And I read in an interview that you said that you're learning how to tell stories in a very different way, and I think we're seeing that. But then Alex, conveniently sitting right next to you, a lot of people make meaning out of words more easily than movement, so you really kind of confront us with your thinking about the stories of Americana. I've been thinking about historical moments, of course, because we're back here. You made this piece and first performed it in 2016. now you're revisiting it in the world we live in today. And I was wondering if you could say something about how maybe your notions of grappling with Americana have shifted in the years since you've premiered it.
Yes, well, today feels reminiscent, actually, of 2016, because when this piece emerged, and it emerged from improvisations, so like a practice of channeling, I think of it as spirit channeling, which came out tonight in this version kind of explicitly, like exorcising demons, but also exercising them, just like letting them work themselves out, because I think the demonic is very much a part of the American subconscious, like a lot of violence and things under the surface that need to come out and need to be dealt with. So yeah, so this like came out in that 2016 moment of feeling like there were things we really needed to face head on in order to heal as a country. And today, with Roe v. Wade being overturned, I felt actually a really similar feeling in my body of like, this can't still be happening, that men in power decide what happens to women's bodies. So it, yeah, in some sense, it doesn't feel that far away. Like, I wish that the piece and the work would become irrelevant and outdated. And I keep thinking, like, there's no way I can keep performing this piece, but it continues to feel relevant and alive because the language that I think covers up a lot of really ugly dynamics is still there, exerting its power. So. Yeah.
Jasmine, I was relating your solo to Alex's because of the way that you draw on sound, but also the visual in your work from the very spectacular opening. And we're so grateful to see the doors of the theater open behind you. Actually, they're in front of you from where you are. But you really have started the dancing of tonight's performance before we ever see you. Some people may have seen you on the grounds. And I was wondering if you could say something about how the environment and maybe even the historical moment have an impact on you as you're preparing to bring us into the world you're creating.
Thank you. There's something for me in the practice that I get to be with, the practice that is built not just by me in a room, seemingly by myself, but it's a way to be with each teacher and each teaching moment, ways that I have learned how I do not want to be, and ways that I've learned how to sit and be patient and listen to spirit and ancestry, memory and lineage, and also to be amongst such incredible and amazing and specific experiences. And so all of it is a part. And so with that, plus what was here before, this architecture, whose homes were on this land, was this once a part of which ocean, what trees are just where you're sitting, where were they? So just being patient enough to listen, and then not only listen but respond. Each moment is different, and I'm very grateful, but there's a lot of practice that comes before, a lot of folks that I'm trusting before, and I'm calling them in, and I name them along the way. And then also ways of imagining, future casting, being alongside the students of the contemporary ballet program while also being alongside these amazing interns and just listening to what's happening just next in the lineage. So all of it matters and all of it's here. And then how can I listen enough to be as specific as those who I get to share the stage with?
I mean, speaking of the importance of the grounds we're on, we got to talk about the Warwick-Gombe troupe. And I have been really thinking about the way movement histories have been gathered in the building of this work. So could you say something about what it's like to bring that work here and to feel that same sort of connection potentially to the land or not? Because once you're on the stage, maybe the kind of the whirl of the action doesn't invite the same kind of contemplation.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. What's important to remember, I think, is that this sort of reconciliation started roughly 20, 30 years ago by a few individuals. And since then, we've slowly, I guess you can say, regained our history, regained knowledge of where we came from hundreds of years ago. So it is good to be back. This is our first time, our first time as a troupe being here on these grounds, and we've enjoyed every bit of it. We've taken it all in, and we're looking forward to seeing what's to come in the future.
So Nélida, we saw you patiently waiting for the train, which is how I knew I could ask you to wait to the end to ask my last question individually. You made part of this work or built on some of these ideas during a Pillow Lab here in April 21. And one of the things that you shared at the time that you were here doing that kind of research without an audience is how many different places are present in the dancers and the dancing, and that you welcome that it's important to know where people come from and the specificity of that, but also the willingness to kind of mix it all up. So I'm wondering how it feels to put it in this context of what is Americana and what is American dance. What does it feel like to put your work that you've been thinking of as something separate from this into this collection?
The work started as a solo work, which later expanded because I thought I needed more bodies because we shared very similar stories. We were connected through flamenco. We know each other through flamenco, and we're upholding a culture that with the utmost respect and integrity as possible. We're connected in that way, but we're connected in a much deeper way in the sense that most of us come from different places and have had very specific journeys getting to America of some sort. And that is what we share in common. So for instance, the idea of the train was basically how we come from our home culture, and we take this journey on the train, and we switch the code so we can always adapt into American culture, and we take the train back and we go back home to our regular home cultures, whether that's from Venezuela, whether that is Native American Indian, whether that is from Puerto Rico. And I felt it was important to uphold all of those stories within the context of the work, because it really is what connects us, and that honesty with what connects us is what we bring to the table, to be honest, within our flamenco work.
So I'm wondering if any of you have a kind of thought about unexpected connections that you're discovering this week, right? Because there's the initial conversation you had with Melanie or Pam or Allie, but now you have been in the theater together, and you've all come on stage for the curtain call and jam to the whistle and the drums. But are there things that, as you're standing in the wings, watching people's work, that you're discovering about your own practice or connections that you didn't expect to see in coming here this week?
I mean, I wish I was in the audience watching. I want to see it from the front. I mean, my husband got to see it, and he was just like, oh my God, Sarah, like, it's so good. And I just, obviously I love being on the sidelines and being in the show, but like, there is this experience that I sometimes miss, like being an audience member and watching everybody's intensity and what the energy that they put out into the audience. And I just, hopefully one day I'll get to see all of them as an audience member and get to experience that, because I know watching from the screen and watching backstage, it can be very intense at moments, but I love that. Like, I just crave that sort of thing, especially in my dancing and in a process with somebody. And, it's just, I would love to experience that.
I think myself and Nélida, our teams share a dressing room, and I was able to watch her performance. I was able to watch most of their performances from the front on the first day. And because we were so close in proximity in the dressing room, we were talking, and there was so much that I was struck from just watching it without knowing much context. But when we spoke to her and heard the context behind it, I felt a lot of connection, because in Indian dance, there's so much that we want to say. There's so much like context and layering, and we're not always able to communicate all of that, you know? And so in a way, seeing it without knowing the backstory, I felt what sometimes people say to us is, you don't need to explain yourself. We feel the power of what you do. But when I did hear the context, it then deepened that even more, you know? And I was like, I had all these aha moments. And I also felt that all of myself and my collaborators share that experience of like a duality, like a dual identity as Americans, but from a very specific cultural heritage, performance art form. And also we talked about these ideas of, even within our cultural forms, there's like these hierarchies of like caste or class, and ways we negotiate our positions of privilege and sort of marginal identities. And so those were things that I felt, all of us felt really moved and connected. That's just one instance, but yeah.
Yes, to add to that, I think as different as each one of our sort of performances are and our art forms are, I think, and I felt since day one, the appreciation that we all have for each other's craft, as different as we are.
Okay, Dormeshia, you just got to tell me. I have an imaginary thing in my mind that happens backstage, that when the four women are in such tight, exquisite unison in the flamenco section, I have a fantasy that you guys are picking up those rhythms and are doing it also.
On the first night, we definitely were. The first couple nights. Tonight, we were a little focused, a little different. But yeah, we definitely, when that clump, when that 6/8 hits, on that first night, we all were like, what is happening? And yeah.
So I want to say this show has the improvisational practices in these forms allows these works to live and breathe. So come back and see it again. You got a 2-show day tomorrow, so I want to just thank them for their beautiful work, and thank you for joining us tonight.